Hello everyone and welcome back to another deck guide, this time featuring the brand new and highly anticipated Elfnotes archetype, as well as the slightly older stuff that I still enjoy that works really well with this, the Rose Dragons. So this is a full synchro spam deck, that's all we're trying to do here, and we might have a little bit of locking the opponent out of the game to our names as well. So if you like to see the opponent squirm and you like to spam synchros, let's get started. First up is going to be Medius the Pure. This is our beating heart and soul of the deck. This is the main character of the current lore archetype segment in Yu-Gi-Oh! And he's pretty good, so when he's normal or special summon, you can special summon a power patron from deck. That doesn't mean anything, we'll get into what that means later. But also if he's in grave, you can shuffle a card from hand or field into the deck to special summon him, which then triggers that first effect. So we have exactly one hard garnet, and you can use him to put it back in the deck so we don't have to worry about it, which is pretty cool. Then for our actual Elfnotes names, we've got Lucina. So how these are going to work is they all special summon from hand to your center main monster zone. Pretty cool. That means that you just can extend like crazy as long as that zone is left open. And then they all have an ignition effect to gain value, and then during the opponent's turn, they all have a disruptive effect they can do by moving around the monster zones. So for Lucina, she special summons to the center, and then ignition effect is to add a different Elfnote name from deck to hand. And then disruptive effect is to swap with the center monster zone to return a low-level monster your opponent controls to the hand. So you can like hit their normal summon with it. Pretty cool. Next up is Tinia. Tinia, same thing, can special summon to the center monster zone, but then can ignition effect to place a continuous spell face up on the field. Then her disruption, and the one that I consider the most important, is to swap to the center monster zone and banish until end phase a card from the opponent's hand. So it's not quite a permanent hand rip like a lot of decks will do, but it still just reduces the options they have to get out of what we're doing to them. Last up for the primary names is Fortuna. This is the one that you could probably play at 1, but she's still a pretty good extender if you open her, so I'm trying out at 3 to start. Again, special summons to the center monster zone, and then you can place a continuous trap face up, and then her disruption kind of sucks because it just lets you swap to the center monster zone to bounce a face-up spell trap. Sometimes you can hit like a field spell that can only be activated once per turn, and that's pretty cool, but you know, it's otherwise the weakest by far. Then for our actual power patron to pull the whole thing together, the power patron is our only tuner in the archetype, and it locks you into only special summoning synchros while it's on the field. That's okay, we've got a bunch of locks, so we're only doing synchros anyways. But during the main phase, you can quick effect target the monster in your center monster zone, increase its level by 3, and then as long as you can immediately synchro summon. So this gives us access to a whole wide range of levels that a lot of decks just have trouble making. For example, if you just normal summon Medius, special summon your power patron out, that's a 5. Even Rose Dragons don't make 5s very well, and they have an archetypal 5. Actually, they have a couple archetypal 5s. So being able to do that is crazy, especially because Elfnote Power Patron, the primary value comes from being sent to grave as synchro material, which just lets you search any other Elfnotes card in the archetype to hand. So normal summon Medius, special out Power Patron, go into Garden Rose Maiden. That lets you search Tinia and just do the entire Elfnotes line while gaining the extra value of that Synchro 5. Or 8. If you wanted to increase the levels, you could go into an 8. Centurion works great with this. That's not what we're doing today. Then we've got our spells. Welcome Home is the more important one and is the first suspect for being raised to a 3 of, because this is a mandatory part of our combo, and even if we open it, we could just use the other one off of Tinia. But it incidentally makes your center monster zone indestructible by card effects, cool, whatever. But you can send a card from hand or field to grave to special summon an Elfnote from your deck with a different attribute, but it synchro locks you. Everything synchro locks you, so we're not doing much else. But it's really cool because that means you can start with Tinia, place this, then swap her out to summon Lucina. Lucina can go grab the Power Patron, and because they all special summon, you can just normal summon Power Patron and then get the effect that way, even if you don't open Medius. So that means that Lucina and Tinia are both starters. Unfortunately, Fortuna is not. But, you know, really cool. The second one, this is the first suspect for being cut. It prevents the center monster zone from being targeted, and then gives all of your cards an effect based on what the attribute of your center monster zone is. Fire and Earth makes all of your synchro monsters pierce. Water or Wind makes your other spell traps indestructible. And what was the third one? You take no battle damage if it's light or dark. So I'm trying it out. I think this is the first card you cut if you're tuning the deck. Then we've got an Elfnotes Rhapsodia of Madness. This is our first trap. Again, we're all continuous spells, continuous traps. So you're going to be placing this most of the time off of Fortuna. And unlike the spells, both of our traps are really, really good. I would actually play 3 of Aristea if you wanted to play more traps, because you always set this because you want to use it on your first turn. And what it does is the opponent cannot attack except your center monster zone as long as you have a monster there. But more importantly, you can send a monster from hand or field to the grave to summon back an Elfnote from grave with different attribute. So you can send off Tinia to get back your power patron to do multiple synchros in a turn, because again, that's the only tuner in the actual archetype. But then after you special summon, you can then just negate a card on field if you have a synchro on field. So it's extension, it's grind game, it's also a disruption. It's just a really cool card in a package, but it is limiting because you have to do everything at once. Then last up for the Elfnote specific cards is Aristea of Trust. This one lets you move a monster to a different monster zone. Like, that's just a thing we want to be doing. And then if you have 3 Elfnote's names on board, you can negate a spell trap and destroy it. So, yeah, it's just good. All of these are good for grindy value. Can't complain. Then we've got 6 more copies of Medius. 3 Archmage Vandalism Assault just lets you add Medius. Theo Realize lets you send Medius from deck to grave, which it can then summon itself back. And then you can also banish this to change the type and attribute of a monster on your field until the end of the opponent's turn. That's good because we have a couple of things in the extra deck that require a plant tuner, and we can just turn Power Patron into a plant, which is cool. Then I'm playing 3 Vengeful Witch. This one you could play at 1, but it will reduce your extension. Technically, you could swap 2 out for the Welcome Homes, possibly. I haven't decided which of those I like more yet. But Vengeful Witch is pretty cool, because if you control a plant synchro monster, you can special summon it from hand, and then if it's sent from grave from anywhere, deck, hand, or field, and you have a synchro monster on the field, you can discard a card to special summon a plant with 1500 or less defense from your deck, but you get synchro locked. We're always going to be summoning out Twilight Rose Black Knight. This is our 1 hard garnet that we want to put back with Medius if we do see him. But he's really cool because you special summon him off of Venge Witch, and then he can just summon the Vengeful Witch back from the grave, and then can modulate her level up or down by 1. So this gives us access to Synchro 6, 7, and 8, depending on what we need at any given time. Then we've got the 1 copy of Black Garden. This is a field spell that makes it so every time a monster is normal or special summoned, the opponent gets a token, and the monster gets its attack halved. So we use this to fill up the opponent's board with tokens so that they do nothing, and even if they tribute summon over the tokens, we have many ways to special summon on the opponent's turn to fill their board back up. That is why this is worth the 51 points in this deck, because we can very consistently get to it and use it to lock down the opponents. We're not just hoping to draw it like Rose Dragons often is. Then we've got 12 spots for non-engine, because we're paying 66 in the main so far. We don't have a ton of points, but we got 2 Ghost Ogres, 2 Ghost Mourners, 2 Nibs, Veiler just acting as a 3rd better copy of Mourner, 3 DD Crows, and a couple of Cyclones. I think Cyclone's better than people still realize it is, just because most disruption is coming out of the back row, at least for my local meta for Genesys, and from what I've seen in general. You could, in theory, cut down to 1 Vengeful Witch and cut the Plea for Help, and then fit in a lot more non-engine, but again, we don't have the points to spend on a ton of non-engine. Conversely, if you wanted to take a few cards out, a 2nd copy of Elfnote Power Patron would be pretty good, because if this guy gets banished, you kind of get locked out of synchros for the most part. So 2 is good, but it's also like really expensive to do that, especially in a deck with a 51-point card. On to the extra deck. Garden Rose Maiden is a 5. This is what we're making off of Power Patron and Medius because it searches Black Garden, and then you can also banish it to summon a Rose Dragon or Dragon Synchro from your deck, or from your graveyard. We have a couple of targets that we can use that for. Then we're playing a High-Speed Roid Chanbara. Just because the pool of 5s kind of sucks, we're not playing a TG Hyper Librarian because it's way too expensive at 33 points. And we just want another option in case we don't need to search the Black Garden and we don't need to make Garden Rose Maiden. So Chanbara can attack twice and kills people very quickly. It represents 4,500 damage on an open board. So just for OTKs, it's fine. Then we've got a Licorice Lily Reaper. We never actually want to make this, but when it's in the grave and the opponent takes burn damage, you can banish it to send one of their monsters to the grave. We do have one particular card that burns, and we have cards that send this straight from extra deck to grave to set that up. Then we are playing one Stardust Charge Warrior. You can make this off of the Twilight Rose Black Knight and Vengeful Witch combo. If you're going to, like, stepping stone them into something else, this just draws you a card on the way. Then we've got Rage Rose Witch, which is pretty important because it makes all of your plants indestructible, and that's a lot of what our end board is. But even more importantly, this lets you foolish a plant from deck and extra deck. So this is how we're sending Lily Reaper. Sometimes we'll send Garden Rose Maiden for that effect instead, but most of the time you send Lily Reaper and you send Vengeful Witch if you didn't open her to trigger her effect to get this line on board. So as long as you can get to a 6, which just the Elfnotes stuff itself, as long as you open Medius, can get to a 6, you're set. Then we are playing one Silvera Wolf Tamer of the White Forest because it's another 6 that you can play that is a tuner, which is cool, but also she just helps you break a board as part of setting up your own board, because when summoned, she Book of Eclipses the opponent's monsters. And then she also just is a 2400 because she bumps herself by 5 for some reason that does double piercing. So again, just helps you clean out a game pretty quick, helps you break a board as part of just getting to your own end board. Very good card in a lot of synchro strategies, basically anything that can make a 6. Then maybe the most important card in the extra deck is Slitzia. So this is our last Elfnote specific name. And it's a real good one, because it gains 3,000 attack while in the center monster zone, but most of the time you just throw it in defense because it's got a big ass anyways. Then you can, during the main phase, yours and or your opponent's, you can special summon an Elfnote from hand or grave, so you can get back your Power Patron on the opponent's turn or on your turn for an extra synchro summon, or both. Why not both? Then you can choose to, you don't have to, reduce the levels of all monsters on the field by 3 if they are at least level 4. So that can kind of act as a disruption if the opponent's trying to do synchro or Xyz shenanigans, but it also helps you set up your levels to get into the specific plays that you are currently trying to get into. Then we've got the big boss for the Rose Dragons. That's going to be Bramble Rose Dragon. So this burns your opponent every time they activate a monster effect for 600, and then drops all of their monsters by 600 attack. And then you can also tribute it to special summon OG Rose Dragon, which just destroys all cards on the field. And then lastly, on follow-up turns, you can banish this from grave to summon back Twilight Rose Black Knight, which then triggers to summon out the Vengeful Witch, which gets you another level 7. So that's just cool. You don't always want to do that, though, because we have a couple ways to get Brambles back, like the Garden Rose Maiden herself. So you can just, like, reuse it and keep the pressure up with that burn damage. Then we have the 2 Black Rose Dragons, because they are a board wipe, and we can just make a 7 naturally, so we can use 1 to wipe the opponent's board, apply pressure, similar to the Silvera, and then another one to make with our Bramble Rose Dragon on the opponent's turn as a board wipe / disruption. So we can make 2, and we sometimes want to. Last up for our 7s is Perialis. Perialis can summon back a high-level plant from graves, so that's going to be Bramble Rose or our Slitzia, because remember, this is a plant. That's how we're summoning out the Vengeful Witch straight from hand. We just make the Slitzia, we have a plant synchro on board, and you're good to go. She can also bring back, like, the Rage Rose Witch, even though Rage Rose can sometimes bring herself back if one of your cards gets destroyed. That's not super consistent. So we can just, grind with Perialis. It's a really good turn 3 and beyond card. Then sometimes we can make a Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. This is a monster negate and destroy that gets really big, so it's hard out in battle. It's not super consistent that we can make it, but we can, and it's a good option to have. Our 1/9 is going to be Wolf Riot. This is the best generic 9, and I kept finding myself wanting a 9. So this gains 300 attack every time a monster effect is activated until it hits 4,000. At 4,000, you can then shuffle this back into the extra deck to shuffle all of your opponent's monsters as well. So you can prime this and then use it as another board wipe. You might be sensing a theme here. We've got a lot of board wipes. So then we've got a couple of 10s starting off with Arms of Gen X Return 0. This one requires a Dark Tuner, so most of the time you're making it with Twilight Rose Black Knight, but you can, in theory, modulate the Elfnotes Power Patron with Theorealize to make it dark. But it's worth all the trouble, because when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can banish a monster from your grave with the same attribute to negate and destroy, and you can do every attribute once per turn. Note that we don't actually have a way to make Earth. You could probably throw some sideboard cards in to give you access to that, but we can do everything else. So Medius is dark, Lucina's fire, Tinia's water, Fortuna is light, the roses are both dark. Then we've got light, dark, and wind represented out of our hand traps. And then we've got dark, wind, light, fire, just a bunch of stuff. Basically everything but earth in the extra deck. So it's not hard to set up 5 negates for if the opponent happens to be playing a bunch of different attributes. Then lastly, the Junora, the Power Patron of Tuning, is our final archetypal card, and it's not technically an Elfnotes card, but it's the Elfnotes Big Boss monster. So this one's kind of hard to summon, actually. You need a tuner and 2 non-tuners exactly, adding up to level 10. But for the trouble, which you can normally set up with a Slitzia fairly competently on the opponent's turn, you can negate the effects of all face-up cards your opponent controls when summoned. That's pretty good. And then secondarily, you can activate a quick effect to make it so any of your opponent's monsters in a column with one of your Elfnotes cannot be used as material for the rest of the turn. It's not too hard to manufacture a situation where the opponent's monster just gets shut off, like 1, maybe 2 of them if you're lucky, which is another disruption. It's actually a fairly potent disruption on top of just negating everything. So that's going to do it for the actual deck profile, guys. Let's see some combos. Alright, so this is going to be our primary 1-card combo, 1.5 I suppose, and that's just because the Rose Dragon stuff takes a random discard and we don't get free draws throughout. But that's fine, we can make it work. And remember that you have 9 copies of Medius, and those combos are always going to look pretty much identical to this. There's just like little nuances to get to him in the first place. But anyways, let's get started. So we're going to normal summon the Medius and use his effect to summon out Power Patron. For this deck, it doesn't matter if you put one or the other in the middle monster zone, but if you're playing something like Centurion, you have to make sure one of them is in the center monster zone. There's also the 3 Brave Sword Souls coming down the pipeline, and you have to put Power Patron in the center, because then you can increase it, and that card needs a level 4 tuner, and that gives you a level 4 tuner. So pay attention to what variant you're playing during this first action. But here we can just straight up go into Maiden, and this is that chain I was talking about where you search 2 cards at once, and then you don't have to worry about it for the rest of the game, basically. But we're going to get Black Garden and Tinia, activate the Black Garden, summon the Tinia for free to our center monster zone, place Welcome Home face up, use that to swap out Tinia for Lucina. You can't do that if you're under Droll, you have to go straight into Fortuna, but the Lucina is the only body you lose there, so your end board is almost identical if you have to do that through Droll. Summon out the Fortuna, and then use her to place the Rhapsodia. Rhapsodia swaps her out for our Power Patron. Note that Rhapsodia swaps, and you can't get the same attribute. So you can't swap Lucina, you have to swap out the Fortuna here to get the Power Patron, because Power Patron is fire. Little bit of a weirdo thing that comes up with this deck, but it's not too bad. Then we can go 5+1 into our Rage Rose Witch, which is going to send a couple of cards from both deck and extra deck. That's going to be the Lily Reaper and our Vengeful Witch. Vengeful Witch pitches whatever our random card in hand was to special summon out Black Knight. Black Knight can bring back the Rage Rose Witch, and hey look, the opponent's entire field is locked up as we go into Slitzia still, bring back Diana, and then we can call this our end board. I'm going to show you the opponent's turn with this deck because there's a lot of weird moving parts that are kind of easier to see when we're using them than just me explaining it to you. So we're going to go to the opponent's turn. Because we got Tinia out, on draw phase, we can hand rip. Cool. Monster gone out of their hand for the rest of the turn. We don't have to worry about that. Hopefully it's like a dark hole or something. But that moves her to the middle monster zone. So right now, she can't be targeted or destroyed. And that's relevant sometimes. Depends on what the matchup looks like. But now, because we have put her in the center monster zone, we can swap her with Lucina to bounce one of the opponent's monsters. I bounce a token. You don't want to bounce the token. You worked hard to put the tokens on their field. But here we're going to do it just for an example. That lets them summon another guy. Oh no, they have another guy. Well, now we can use our... Oh, and important to note is that this deck is really good at refilling the board with tokens if the opponent manages to get rid of them because we summon so many times on their turn. But anyways, we're going to use Slitzia to bring back our Power Patron, and then drop everything's level by 3. This sets up our big boss monster Junora on the opponent's turn whenever we need that full blanket negate. Cool. So we're going to do that now. For example, we can raise the level of our center monster zone back to 6. Then we've got 6 plus 3 plus 1. That equals our 10. We can summon out Junora, and that's going to blanket negate their board, but also trigger Power Patron to find follow-up for next turn, which is cool. Cool. So that happens. And then our last piece of interaction, you should know how it works, is Rhapsodia can send something from field or hand, so for example that Fortuna that we just searched, to summon back a different attribute and then negate a card on field. So if they do have a board breaker, if they have a dark hole that they're trying to use to get rid of your tokens, you do have one answer to that. If they have 2, then you have to play Yu-Gi-Oh! But we have one answer to anything that would out the lock. Cool? Cool. Combo number 2 is just Tinia or Lucina. You can do either, and the combo looks pretty similar. Here's just Tinia. We don't need the discard because we're not going into the Rose package here. Let's get started. We can special summon the Tinia and use her to place Welcome Home. Use Welcome Home to swap her out for the Lucina. Lucina's going to go search Power Patron, and we can normal summon it, which gives us access to a 7, so we go into Slitzia, and we can search the Fortuna off the Power Patron going to grave. Special summon out Fortuna, place Madness, bring back Tinia, swap out the Fortuna because her effect kind of sucks for our Lucina, and then we are set up to just pass to the opponent's turn, and we've got a few disruptions, quick synchro, all that good stuff. So we go to end phase, and same thing, I'll play this one out real quick. We can draw phase, swap out to rip a card from their hand. When they normal summon, we can swap again so that Lucina can bounce their normal summon. Then Slitzia can summon out our Power Patron again, drop everything's level. We can increase the level so we can go into Junora. Again, we can search here, we can banish them, we can stop them from using cards as material. And then we can use Rhapsodia's effect to send off a card to summon one with a different attribute and negate. So again, we can negate one big board breaker that would end us. I summon out Power Patron here just because it's follow-up for next turn. But that's what we're looking to do on just the Elfnote stuff. People have been talking about it not being great. I think it's still pretty solid as an end board, but it does get a lot better if you have that Medius. And then combo number 3 is going to be a 2.5 card combo with an Elfnote starter that isn't Medius and Vengeful Witch, just to kind of show you why I'm playing the Vengeful Witch at 3, because that's the card that I'm not the most sure about, and I wanted to give you the option. This is what we can do with it. So we're going to special summon the Tinia and go through basically combo number 2 for a bit, because we need to get our Synchro on board before we can use the Vengeful Witch effectively. So, normal summon Power Patron, go into a 7, now we have Slitzia on field. We're still going to search Fortuna, but now the Vengeful Witch is online and can special summon herself from hand, so we're going to do that. Then we're going to bring back our Power Patron with Slitzia's effect, and we can still go into the Garden Rose Maiden just because we had her in hand, even though we didn't start with Medius. That's going to do full combo still. We can activate Black Garden, summon the Fortuna, and now we're putting tokens on the opponent's board still. We can swap out for another Power Patron, and right here is a very interesting board state. We have not used the Power Patron's modulation, which means we've got a lot of options. We've got a 3-tuner, a 1-tuner, a 4-tuner, a 4, a 5, and we can modulate a level with Black Knight. So we can get into effectively any synchro level in the game here from like 5 and up, which is so cool. But here, we have to make a choice. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make Brambles, give them a token. Then I'm going to make the Rage Rose Witch still, because that is going to protect us from destruction on both the Strelitzia and the Bramble Rose. It's also going to put the Garden Rose in Grave, which is cool, because now I'm going to use Bramble's effect to summon out Black Rose Dragon. That's going to give them the last token, but then we can use Garden Rose Maiden to bring back the Brambles. So this is what our board's going to look like on end phase, but at the start of the opponent's turn, we can swap out that Black Rose Dragon we got for free for the Tinia still. So now their board is locked and we have hand-ripped them still. And we've got plenty of stuff we can still do. We can still do Strelitzia to summon back and full combo. I mean, I'll just let it play here, not necessarily narrate. You should know what we're doing by now. But I don't know why the bot did this. It was kind of funny. It tried to kill itself. But yeah, so this ends up on arguably, no, not even arguably, definitely a better board than even the Medius 1 card, because we started with the Vengeful Witch in hand alongside any other starter. So you can see, I think she's pretty good. She might not get you through hand traps as well as certain other extenders, but that remains to be seen how important it is. Cool? Cool. And we're back with closing thoughts on our Elfnotes deck. So, first up, pros. I love this deck, and I'm so excited. It might not usurp Punk, but it's going to be up there as one of my favorites, and that's because it's just a new Synchro Combo deck. You can, similar to Punk, play the whole thing as a pure version and play it more as a control deck, and it has strengths and weaknesses there. Normally, it's incredible into Droll, but it can't do anything. Like, there's no good options this deck has into, for example, Nibiru, which kind of sucks. But you can always play through Droll. So a little bit pros and cons there. But where it shines, in my opinion, is as a combo deck. Because this is a deck that accesses 5s, which is very weird to get into with most decks. But it also does 7s very easily. It can do 10s. So there's just like so many levels that it can get into very simply and as part of its normal combo, which I think is really cool. Thank you, Power Patron, for triggering on being used as material. For example, Centurion is another deck that is famously super resilient to hand traps. And you can just use Power Patron and Medius, use Power Patron's effect to increase level by 4. That gets you to an 8. You go into Primera Primus, and you search both your Emblema, which is a starter for Centurion, and your Tinia, which is your starter for Elfnotes, in the same chain, and then neither of those decks has to search anything else to set up significant disruption. Sure, you would rather not get Drolled, but you end on almost full end board through Droll, because you search 2 important cards at once. Same thing here, we're searching the Black Rose Garden and Tinia at the same point, so we don't really care after that. We're not trying to search anything else. As far as cons, if you're playing it pure, it doesn't put up that many disruptions, and the disruptions, my main complaint, I suppose, is that the disruptions are heavily telegraphed. Because you need to do a bunch of stuff and set up Junora before you can actually summon it, the opponent sees it coming, and so they're not going to walk into it once they actually know what the deck is trying to do. In a combo version like this, you end up with a more layered and less breakable end board, because you're doing things like floodgating the opponent by filling up all of their monster zones with tokens and things like that. So I am going to enjoy it a lot more as a combo deck, whereas people have rightfully so possibly expressed some amount of concern at its utility as a control deck right now. But that is very much subject to change. Oh, right, they changed the name. In the future, because we already know the Wave 2 of support for this deck. And while I haven't really played with the Power Patron specific stuff, I think that's a whole different deck, basically. Regina is absolutely incredible. So this card coming down the pipeline lets you send another Elfnote card from hand or field to grave to special summon this. Note you don't have to special summon it to the center monster zone. But you still want to, because if it is summoned to the center monster zone, you can special summon any other Elfnote monster from your deck, and then if this is used as synchro material, you can add it back to hand. So this just becomes by far the best extender because it summons two bodies at once. Like, you don't need it for the combo. Obviously, we can already do full combo just fine, but we just get a killer extender that's going to be a 3 of down the line. So the deck's going to definitely be better then, but before then, and even probably after, I'm just going to be playing it as combo slop, so you'll probably see it again in the future. And with that, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. I hope you liked it, and I hope you like Elfnotes as much as I do, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.